Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our next webinar. I think you're going to find this very interesting, the way that everything has shaken out in the past couple of weeks. Let's go ahead and dive into it. So on Friday, late afternoon, the United States Department of Homeland Security, in conjunction with the Department of Labor, announced the temporary final rule would be published yesterday that increases the number or the numerical cap for H-2B visas for the rest of the fiscal year through September 30th of 2026 by an additional 64,000 visas. A lot of you are asking why 64,000? Well, that's what the legislature had determined would be the maximum number of H-2B visas that would sustain the economy at rates that we have seen not only during the Biden administration, but also the initial part of the Trump administration. Now, the reason why this is important is because the last 4 years of the Biden administration, they released the same number of visas, 64,000 supplemental visas. And what I want you to remember for the rest of this webinar is not all of those 64,000 supplemental visas were used. So although what we're going to talk about may seem grim, depending on which lottery group you're in, I think I can say with a high degree of confidence that everybody's going to get their visas. What I also know for certain is that you need to be clear about when the visas are going to be available to you. Generally, our clients need, for the most part, they need spring visas at the end of February, the beginning of March. And that's because that's ideally when the supplemental season begins. Some of you have implemented a system to be able to obtain visas either during the first week of February, the second week of February, in anticipation of that March 1st start date, particularly those of you who are in the southeast part of the United States. I will touch upon what this rule means to you because it's also interesting. But let's get into the meat of the rule first before we kind of delve into what it means. So of the 64,000 additional visas, 46,000, okay, so 46 of the 64,000 are going to be set aside for only returning workers. And so a returning worker, as we commonly refer to in the glossary, is an H-2B employee that has previously entered the United States. It could be for you as an employer or for some other employer that is seeking to re-enter. Now, the reason the government really employs this returning worker is because the consular interviews are pretty quick. They're expedited. And that's because the H-2B worker has previously been vetted for criminal and security concerns. And so basically, we can fast track the interviewing process. This is the interesting development, okay? And this is different than the Biden administration. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the slide. But there are 18,000 visas that are going to be available beginning with a May 1st start date that are available for new workers. So this is a change, and it's a pretty significant change. And it may impact even those of you who are in lottery group A, who or B and C, I'm sorry, that may be seeking supplemental additional new workers. Okay, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But that's one of the big differences. How are they going to allocate? Well, 18,000 of the visas that are limited to returning workers, so it's somebody who's had an H-2B visa in 2023, 2024, and 2025, what we've got is a situation where the petitions must have requested employment start dates from January 1st to March 31st. And employers must file those petitions no later than 14 days after the supplemental cap has been reached. So no later. So there's two things in here that I want you to pay particular attention to. I know the answer to, because I've been doing this for 20 years, but you'd be surprised at the confusion on the listservs about how this is going to apply. What I can tell you with a high degree of confidence is we can start filing pre-April 1st refiles. Okay, so that's for those of you who had a pre-April 1st start date, so somewhere during the first half of the cap, who got hit by the statutory cap and have not had access to supplemental visas. Now you have access. So if you had an October 1 start date, for example, and you got hit by the statutory cap, we are going to refile those applications on your behalf. And as long as the start date is after January 1st, those visas are applicable to you. And we know that we won't be able to file those until at least 15 days before the statutory cap, which we believe is going to happen in 3 weeks. So rest assured that for most of you, I've already reached out to you. If you have a pre-April 1st start date that you hit the statutory cap, you're going to be able to apply for the supplemental visas, and but you're going to be earmarked to returning workers. So it's only going to be returning workers that are available to you. If we have that situation, and you want to be a little bit nimble about how you mobilize, then we've got other discussions about filing additional applications. But for the most part, I believe that if you had a pre-April labor certification and you hit the statutory cap back in October, you're still going to be able to mobilize H-2B workers before April 1st, but we've got to have that application in within the next week, week and a half. And that's because I fully anticipate us hitting the statutory cap sometime during March. And I'll show you why I believe that that's the case. Now, the interesting question is, if we hit the statutory cap in March and not enough employers have petitioned for these supplemental visas, will they roll over? I can tell you from my experience with the agency that they will. And so we're going to address why most of you in the D lottery group should be watching this supplemental allocation during pre-April 1, because it may impact your allocation of visas. The second part of the allocation of the visas is significantly limited just to April 1st to April 30th. So what does that mean? There are 33,000 visas that are part of the statutory cap. That will cover all of Lottery Group A. Okay, so if you're Lottery Group A, you're likely going to receive statutory visas that are not restricted by the returning worker requirement. Secondly, what we've got is a situation where he's going to allocate 27,000 visas for employers who have start dates between April 1st and April 30th. And really, this is kind of misleading because it's really only April 1st. And that's because, remember the previous webinar, if you've not reviewed it, employers with an April 1st start date were part of a random lottery, and the lottery resulted in alphabetical categories all the way to Lottery Group H that had April 1st start dates. So what does the 27,000 supplemental visas mean? What that means is Lottery Group B and Lottery Group C are likely going to be able to qualify for the returning worker supplemental visas. So if you're in B and you're in C and you're a little worried about whether or not you're going to have your guys here April 1st, we're probably going to have your guys here by April 1st or very, very soon thereafter, depending on how the consulates move. That is better news than what I had a month ago when I said that the Trump administration had announced that they were limiting the supplemental visas to 35,000. Now that they've increased that by 30,000, now we've got a situation where we now can include comfortably, potentially most of the D group as well. So if you're in the D group, I think you're probably safe. We've got some conditions that we need to apply, and we should have those discussions if you're in the D group. But basically, I think you're probably safe, and that's because of the rollover of the winter visas. This is the really interesting allocation. It's the third allocation with employers with start dates May 1st. Now, all of you are saying, well, we have April 1st start dates. Well, if you're in lottery group E, F, G, or H, you're not going to get the supplemental visas. They're all going to be allocated before the Department of Labor gets to your application, most likely. What we are proposing and what we're going to do, unless you tell us otherwise, is we're going to file a supplemental May 1st start date temporary labor certification on your behalf to try and qualify for these May 1st visas. That's really your only shot at getting visas if you're in lottery groups E, F, G, or H. Well, the upshot is if you want new workers, you're going to be eligible to get those new workers. And that's because these visas, for some reason, are not limited to returning worker exemption. I don't know why that's the case, but what it does mean is new workers are going to be available May 1st. What it also means is if you applied and are receiving returning worker only visas, but would prefer to supplement those with additional new visas, we can also do that. So you guys can go ahead and email whoever our contact is with KJ Partners and say, hey, I think I'm going to get my February 1, February 15, April 1 visas. I think some of them may be earmarked for returning workers, but I'd like to get a couple new workers. Can you file for a May 1 application? And the answer is yes, we will do so. And we're going to announce some other things too a little bit later. Now, why do I think that we're going to hit the cap in March? The reason why I think we're going to get the cap in March is because for federal fiscal year 2025, we hit it on March 5th. For federal fiscal year 2024, we hit it on March 7th. And for federal fiscal year 2023, we hit it on February 27th. Now, some of you might be asking, why did the cap, the statutory cap, get hit about a week earlier in fiscal year 2023? Part of that has to do with the fact that the vast majority of people were relying on the two company model that we have employed, where you utilize one company or a different location in order to get October visas and then use those October visas for the spring. Because of the allocation of the visas originally, and because we had visas that were extra last year, and because a lot of employers were actually using employees from the Northern Triangle, that date kind of backed up. I fully anticipate us hitting the cap sometime during the first week of March, which means that 14 days prior to the statutory cap is probably going to be within the next week or so. So if you've got a October 1 to April 1 start date, we need to file your supplemental 129 within the next week. I will also remind you, if you guys are not aware of it, about the curious case of the government moving away from filing fee checks. Now we have to file either with credit card authorization or bank authorization. The bank authorization is a lot more complicated because you have to contact your bank to alert them that the government may be pulling from your account. So just be patient with us as it relates to the filing fees, because it's no longer as easy as cutting a check and FedExing it to us. So what did the previous administration's allocation of visas mean? And what does the new Trump administration mean? Well, remember the additional visas last 4 years were split not into 3 allocations, but actually 4. You had a pre-April 1 allocation, a post-April 1 to May 15 allocation, and then a May 15 to the end of the year allocation. And then you had 20,000 just roaming visas that were available for employers from the Northern Triangle, plus the 4 additional countries. So you had Haiti, Colombia, Ecuador, and Costa Rica. That is no longer part of this rule. So if you are an employer that mobilized H-2B workers from those 7 countries, you're just going to bring them back as returning workers. If you wanted to bring new visas from those countries, you would be available to do that. But if you are attempting to utilize the Northern Triangle plus 4 countries because of the difficulty in getting allocations because of your lottery assignment, that's no longer available to you. If you're a lottery group H, which is way at the back of the train, and you're hoping that you can rely on these 20,000 visas because they were not exhausted during the last 4 years, they were always available, that is no longer an option to you. You must move forward with a May 1 application. So that's what's also critical. So what does this mean now? Okay, big picture. For our clients with a pre-March 31st, 2026 start date, we have to refile with a January 1 start date for you within the next week or so. We are using our best resources to do that. but you have to realize that there's a cost associated with that. We recognize that you guys are a little bit cost conscious. If you do not want to pay for half the application, which is what we have historically charged for that supplemental application, then let us know that you're going to do away with your pre-March 31st, 2026 labor cert, and then you don't want to move forward with the supplemental visas. Otherwise, what I've instructed my people to do is just file it, and then we'll get express authorization from you to proceed when we request the filing fee checks. If you're not interested in paying half your cost for an additional application to essentially ensure that you're going to get H-2B visas right now or within the next week and a half, then go ahead and let us know. But otherwise, we're moving forward with that. If you've got an April 1, 2026 start date and do not have transferring winter workers, okay, that's an important caveat. If you've got, if we worked with you with a strategy where you've got transferring workers and you don't need to rely on the visa availability, you're just going to move them over because the October 1 visas are exempt from the April 1 cap, then this is not going to be applicable to you. But there are some of you that don't do the winter transfers. And so if you're in any lottery group below C, right? I know that B and C are going to have the supplemental visas. I don't know about D, and I would prefer us not risk. We're going to file for a May 1st temporary labor certification, again at half price, before February 15th of 2026. That's the date. That's going to be roughly 75 days prior to May 1st, which is when the filing fee window closes. So we are going to automatically file that application. And again, just like the supplemental visa workers, if you don't want it, then let us know so that we don't waste time working for you. But otherwise, I've instructed everybody to go ahead and prepare that application and then invoice everybody. The reason why that is because the number of supplemental visas that are allocated between April 1st and April 30th will only cover B and C groups. I think D groups will receive leftovers, but if we don't apply and you don't qualify for the leftovers, then you're out of luck. And I don't want you to be in that position. I think it's worth half the cost of your original application to have that insurance guarantee. You've already paid, essentially 2/3 of the entire cost of not only qualifying for statutory visas, but also supplemental visas. And I think it's worth the investment to proceed in that regard. If you have an E, F, G, or H lottery group, like I said, we are going to proceed with a May 1st lottery temporary labor certification for you. It is the only way you're going to receive any possibility of the supplemental workers. Now, I know some of you are upset about the mobilization timing. I didn't draft the rule. So I can only tell you at least somebody persuaded the government that May 15 is too late in the season, so they moved it up 2 weeks. Potentially that could go higher during the next couple of weeks of the Trump administration. I have to admit, I was not bullish that the administration was going to release supplemental visas during the discussion of the Homeland Security appropriation bill that is currently being done to, forego a closing of that agency. I think somebody got to the legislature and said, this is a carrot that you can release that'll offset some of the anger that all of the events in Minnesota and in South Texas have caused. And so that announcement came out of nowhere. And it's good news. The bad news is we're going to have to be pretty nimble about the strategy that we approach. And we need to be, kind of cognizant of the fact that if USCIS isn't receiving applications for supplemental visas when they say they have, which was Tuesday, then we need to plan on the future. And those plans include contingencies like the supplemental visas is directly to the events of Minnesota. If they take the HSI agents, CBP agents that are in Minnesota and draw them down, that potentially the release of supplemental visas may not help. We need to discuss a winter need because that's the only alternative that I have. With that, I'll just remind you, as I do at the end of every webinar, that email communication is always the preferable form. What I say to most of you, unless ICE is knocking on the door, just send an email, ask a substantive question, or ask for us to arrange for a time for us to talk. Again, escalation is always available to you. If you can't reach one of us, go ahead and go to the entire group, immigration and kjpartners.law, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And in the future, we'll talk about mobilization. I have been seeing trends at the consulates. I think those trends are actually very, very good. We can talk about travel costs and subsistence. Remember, as soon as the guys receive their new visas, they're authorized to go down to the DMV and get their driver's licenses. And so with that, I really appreciate your attention on this matter, and I look forward to talking to you guys again.